today. I'm thrilled, I'm thrilled to be a moderator as Farah Law School kick off the first episode of our fourth virtual lecture series in the celebration of International Moons Day. As the lunar exploration shifts towards long-term human presence and commercial activities, space law must become more inclusive. Historically dominated by few spacefaring powers, the modern space sector now includes emerging nations eager to participate. Bridging the gap between these groups is critical for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable future in space. This lecture series aims to expand public awareness and legal understanding of lunar exploration by examining international legal framework, geopolitical, and capacity building. The session equips students, legal professionals, and space enthusiasts to engage directly with the future of international space law. Let me introduce you to Farah Law School as well. Farah Law School was founded on July 2nd, 2023 by Farah Yasmin to strengthen the international law community, particularly in space law, cyber law, and comparative constitutional law through global participation, lectures, and development events. I would request the president and founder of Farah Law School, Farah Yasmin, to give us more insight of the Farah Law School. Over to you, Farah. Farah, could you hear me? Farah, you're muted.
Okay. Am I audible clearly?
You're clear.
Yeah. Distinguished guests, legal colleagues, and space enthusiasts from around the world, welcome. I'm Farah Yasmin, the founder and president of Farah Law School. Yeah, you may hear the nature from my background. And when we established our educational platform on 2nd of July 2023, our vision was clear: to build global community equipped to tackle the legal challenges of tomorrow, from cyber law and comparative constitutional law to the vast complexities of space law. And today, as we mark International Moon Day, we are officially kicking off the first episode of our fourth virtual lecture series, Escalating the Moon Exploration Opportunities for Emerging Space Nations. And for the first episode, we have a special topic: how to fight and win space wars, delivered by Mr. Paul Szymanski and moderated by Ms. Mahima Gehlot. So thank you very much for joining us. And I do think the topic is critical as we are entering a transformative era. Outer space no longer just about brave lunar visits or an exclusive club of historical spacefaring powers. No, we are stepping into an age of long-term human presence and commercial activity, where emerging space nations are ready to innovate and contribute. So bridging the gap between established powers and rising nations is not just an ideal. It is critical for a peaceful, equitable, and sustainable future in outer space. And this series was designed to demystify those legal frameworks, examine geopolitical dynamics, and empower every one of you to actively shape the future of space governance. So thank you for being part of this journey with us, and let's explore the true frontiers of space law together. Thank you again, and back to Mahima.
Thank you so much, Farah. With this session and our guest over here, let me introduce you Mr. Paul Szymanski. Paul Szymanski is an internationally acclaimed scholar and space warfare expert who currently serves as an independent consultant and the founder of Space Strategy Center. With his 50 years of experience in the field related to space control, including policy, strategies, simulations, and threat assessment, he is recognized as a major contributor to United States military space doctrine. Throughout his career, Szymanski has contributed with high-level organizations such as White House National Security Council, NSC, Congress and the Pentagon, NASA, DARPA, FEMA, all branches of US military, and NATO's Supreme Alliance Commander Transformative Group. He has spent 27 years working in critical non-NRO space control programs, developing new concepts and managing technical programs vital to US national security. As a prominent thought leader, he has authored 15 books on the outer space warfare that serves as the foundational text for modern space strategies, while also delivering over 200 lectures globally and publishing extensively in the prominent defense journals like Aviation Week and Studies Quarterly. He continued to share his expertise today and remain available for executive consulting seminars and lectures. Over to you, Professor.
Good morning. My name's Paul Szymanski again, and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That is the United States. That's the home of Billy the Kid and Breaking Bad, if you guys know what that really means. Uh, Unfortunately, I'm going to go through this very quickly to fit within the allotted time thing, but I'll talk a little bit about myself, a little bit of history of space warfare, some basic principles, what's been happening in space in the Ukrainian conflict, and how does that really affect the moon? And then I'll be open to questions. And there's actually a contest going on here. On the lower left are various patches I collected for the space warfare community. And there's an alien coming out of the green door. There's an expression at the Pentagon that they say, oh, that's behind the green door, meaning it's highly classified kinds of things. There's one patch here that surprisingly celebrates a major security incident that could have caused the downfall of an allied government. I won't tell you which one that is. At any rate, a little bit about me, over 50 years experience. I've started out very early. At age 22, I started working at the Pentagon, and now it's been 52 years. And consequently, I was always the youngest person in the room at the time. So I'm 74 years old now. I'm the last of the original space warfighters from the 1970s. So I have a lot of history on that. And then I have a space warfare discussion group over well, it's over 34,000 members now that you might want to join if you're interested. So, and I don't care if you're talking about ancient Greek warfare or modern space warfare, it's still human mind against human mind. And so this is a quote from Sun Tzu over 2,000 years ago, ancient Chinese military philosopher, that's saying strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. But tactics without strategy is just the noise before defeat. And this is what I'm going to emphasize today is that most people are thinking tactically in space, but space is global. You might attack one satellite, but it has global consequences. And you might be worried about some satellite over Ukraine that the enemy is using, but you don't have to attack it over Ukraine. You can attack it in the Indian Ocean if you want, anywhere down its orbital path. So that's why a space war is actually a world war. Now, a little bit of history, and sorry, I'll go very quickly over a lot of things. It goes to ancient Roman time, at least a sci-fi kind of thing. Lucian's True History had Roman legions attacking the moon. And I suppose they had giant spiders they had to deal with and things like that. And then there's a famous artist who did all kinds of science fiction things, Frank Tinsley. And if you got this briefing, you can click on here and see the references. Um, there was a nuclear anti-satellite system back in 1959, 2 years after the Russians' Sputnik. There would be a missile shot out of an aircraft to take out satellites. Here's a Russian anti-aircraft gun that was on the Russian space station, Almaz. I worked with the F-15 fighter aircraft anti-satellite program at the Pentagon. That again was a missile coming off an F-15 aircraft to take out satellites. Here's the Russian kinetic killers. Here's some concepts. Here's a Russian laser to take out satellites, and it almost looks like it's on the moon. I don't know. It's just a theoretical concept. Here's a Russian fighter taking out satellites. And then we have a saying here in the United States, there's many ways to skin a cat. And so you don't have to necessarily attack the satellite. You can attack the ground systems like we did in Desert Storm. It took out the heavy Earth terminals there. Now, there's been 11 different space wars. Back in the 1960s, a Russian trawler jammed one of our commercial communication satellites for a few days off the East Coast. There's a story about CSAT. That's a NASA satellite that I think it was a radar satellite that can measure the height of waves on the sea, for some sort of weather kind of thing. And they turned it on and they said, oh my gosh, um, we can detect nuclear submarines at operating depth. It just sort of wiggled the waves a little bit. And you see this arrow exactly where the submarine is. And so that negated 1/3 of the United States nuclear triad. So according to one guy, they faked its death, though we have some imagery of it and it seemed all bent out of shape. I don't know what happened there. Uh, in the 1980s, every time Russia or the United States tried to launch a satellite into space, the missile would explode or fall into the ocean or Siberia. And I don't know if we were taking out each other's back and forth. I already mentioned Desert Storm taking out satellite terminals. There was an incident in the 2010s. I can't tell you the details, but is rumored it was started by a drunken Russian colonel. I was told that a Chinese ship in the Southeast Pacific started jamming in American weather satellites. And again, I don't know. Well, that's about the time the war in Ukraine was starting to heat up. And then I can mathematically prove to you that the United States attacked Russian GLONASS satellites in 2014. You just look at the orbital dynamics and where they're at the time. And then 3 years ago, I was in Lyon, France, at the invitation of the French Air and Space Force. And two French lieutenant colonels told me about why there's a Space Force. And they said back in 2017, um, they had a Russian, or I'm sorry, China has these manipulator satellites with mechanical arms, and they attacked an American missile warning satellite and started tearing it apart. And again, a lot of this stuff is, well, why would they do that? They wouldn't do that for the fun of it. It must have been a response, something the US did. The US probably did something in a later response. There's, I'm old enough to know that countries are just like children. They'll do anything they want if they can get away with it from their parents. The parents for the country is their own citizens, legal bodies like the United Nations and so forth. And you can get away with a lot in space because people don't really know what's happening. It's the same like with submarine warfare or spy versus spy and all that. And countries love that kind of thing. So this was sort of a warning shot towards the United States from China. And I don't know what the final outcome was of that, though. Just before you want to start a nuclear war, you would attack your enemy nation's um, missile warning satellites so they couldn't tell which missiles are being launched towards you and which angle they're going at and where the nuclear detonations and all. So if there ever should be a space treaty, there should be a treaty saying, don't go anywhere near a country's missile warning satellites because you might trigger a nuclear war. They might get an itchy trigger finger and say, well, why are they attacking my satellites here? I better start, doing a nuclear attack and so forth. So that's really a very bad thing to do. So some foundational principles I already mentioned, all warfare is still between human minds. And space, generates and transmits information. So you really talk about an information warfare when you're talking about space warfare. And so, in one sense, you're not attacking the satellite, you're attacking the mission of the satellite. Uh, what is it's an imagery satellite. It's going to take a picture of the battlefield, and we're going to do this left hook tomorrow. We have to deny the adversary the ability to see it. So, and really, when you think about it, you're not only not you're attacking the adversary's commander's mind, that is mind. So you just spent hundreds of the battlefield, but maybe it didn't change the adversary commander's mind one way or the other. He found out some other way about it. So it's a kind of atmosphere because it's information war ultimately, because space is just generating information. And then I'm also old enough to understand, and I think many other countries understand this, but they're not the United States. Peace afterwards. the whole reason you're fighting a war is geopolitical realignments afterwards. So you have to really understand, oh, okay, I'm fighting in space. And oh wow, I got all these great weapons, and I'm just itching to push that big red button. And you blow up the adversary's satellites, and you say, we won. Well, no, you lost the peace. Suddenly, there's all this space debris. All your allies hate you because the debris destroyed their satellites. You lost. You didn't win. So you have to really think of that. And even the ancient Greeks, Polybius, over 2,000 years ago, understood that it's not the objective of war to annihilate those who given provocation for it, but to cause them to mend their ways, just change their attitude in one way or another. And so, some characteristics of space, well, it's global. Let's say you're fighting in the Middle East and you don't want this information being downloaded from a satellite. And so you take out all the adversary's Earth terminals so he can't receive it. But he can still receive, let's say, an imagery picture in Thailand or in India and some commercial receiver site, and via submarine cable bring it up into the Middle East again. So again, you're talking about total world war in some sense. Are you going to bomb that Indian or Thai, you know, satellite terminal? Or are you going to blow up that submarine cable? Probably not and all, but you got to think all these through. And I've already hinted on a lot. And I've been told coming up, blew up one of their, and I'm told that the president of the United States, maybe they wouldn't tell him either. I don't know. You know how governments are, all the different parts of the government hate each other, kind of thing. Um, oh, and then I keep saying, space warfare is sort of like terrestrial warfare, but in one way it's different. That you can attack a satellite. You might think, oh, the thing has to come close to me. Well, ultimately that's true, but a satellite can be on the opposite side of the Earth and be close to you, and the amount of time and fuel it takes to maneuver close to you if it's in the same altitude and inclination. So, you have to think different in maps. So, what's considered a threat? So let me just quickly go through this. There's various means of attacking space systems. Not this is satellite, but the whole system. There's diplomatic, economic. This is what Russia and China have been doing for years, trying to make treaties to restrict the United States' space weapons programs. There's all kinds of cyber. If you click this, it'll show you the different cyber means. That's sort of the favorite because electrons don't have serial numbers printed on them. You can get away. It's called plausible deniability. It's like, well, no, I didn't do it, kind of thing. And, countries kind of like it that way. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of their own people. So leaders will, not talk about, my enemy just blew up my satellite or, did a cyber attack. I'm not going to admit to it or anything because that makes me look weak. And then the other thing is directed energy lasers. I've been at a ground site with a big laser, but you have to wait 30 days until all the potential targets come over, and maybe it'd be cloudy at that time or something like that. So they really aren't that effective. And I mentioned there's a cyber attack database online. You can click here. There's been hundreds of attacks on commercial satellites. It's not anything new about that. And then the other one is physical attacks. Let's say going against the terrestrial system, blow up the ground terminals. There's physical attacks, space-based, where you have the classic kinetic kill vehicle causes debris. Here's 2 years ago, China published openly this sticky bomb. It goes into the exhaust cone of a satellite. It sticks in there, and it doesn't explode. It's thermocharged. It melts the satellite. And so you could stick it in there and have it there for years, maybe. The satellite can't eject it or anything like that. And then someday you have some big red button you push and it, explodes. Here's a major meteorologic satellite that looks like a military one, it fell down in the factory. Well, that's tens of millions of dollars of damage. Who knows if a janitor was paid off to loosen some bolts or whatever. And the other popular thing nowadays are inspection satellites, where you get up close and be able to kiss it and do all kinds of funny things to it. US, I've been on 5 different programs for that. I've been on 12 different space weapons programs. The US admits to having 6 of these GSAP systems that can come up and start playing with the satellite. Russia has them. France has been complaining about them getting too close to their military satellites. China has them. France told me they were building some a few years ago. I think Britain is, and who knows what else. So that cyber and these space to space, it's called rendezvous and proximity operations, RPO. It seems to be the popular techniques lately. So who are the big space power countries? Well, the US, really, and that's been true for 50 or 60 years, quite frankly. Really big at cyber attacks. Here's the F-15 anti-satellite program shooting off a missile at a satellite, a test. Here's a Russian mobile laser anti-satellite system. So it used to be the United States #1, Russia #2, but Russia sort of bombed out in the 1990s and they got behind, and Russia and China came up now. I don't know who's #2 nowadays. Certainly China is a big threat, but when you think about it, if you do a bigger picture thing, when is the last time in the last 1,000 years that China invaded someone and took them over? Think about how many countries speak Chinese as their prime language. One, there's one thing having weapons, there's the other thing knowing how to use them and when to use them and things like that. So on paper, you might look really good. But if you go back to military history, World War II, the Allies in France had 17 times more tanks than the Germans. And they were better tanks, thicker armor, better guns, yet the Blitzkrieg obliterated them. Now, why is that? And they had the Maginot Line and all these fortifications and all. Well, the Germans had better doctrine and better leaders. And that's what really made the difference. And so, you can sit there and say, oh, look at all these great weapons I have. I'm invulnerable. Well, that's the first step to defeat is overconfidence. And, I mentioned too, they have India. There's the mission Shotki, direct descent anti-satellite system. I think China, oh yeah, we can do it too. I mean, to really take out a lot of Chinese satellites, you'd probably need 100, 200 of these. And then all the space debris you would make, it just, who knows? And so that's sort of my assessment of the various countries. No time to go through it all. This was a funny incident. And again, it's children getting away with things in space. China supposedly had what's called their Compass G2, or we call it Badao, and it's their GPS kind of satellites. They have some at GPS altitudes and some at geosynchronous altitudes. So this particular Compass G2 supposedly died when it was first launched a few years ago, and it was drifting around the geosynchronous belt. And back in 2022, the Chinese said, oh, we're going to take one of our manipulator satellites, grab a hold of it and belt and put it into a safe graveyard orbit, they claimed. So I look at that, and maybe I'm a suspicious person. I worked many suspicious programs. And they did this maneuver during daylight time. So our optical sensors, radars don't go all the way to geosynchronous. Our optical sensors couldn't see what they were doing. They only did it when over the Chinese mainland. And instead of pulling it up to a graveyard orbit, they towed it tens of degrees across the geosynchronous belt. Now, the biggest thing in space is fuel. That's everything, maneuverability. You wouldn't waste all this fuel unless you're trying to hide something. And what did they do? Well, they pulled it up to 3,000 kilometers above geosynchronous. The graveyard orbit is only 300 kilometers. Why did they pull it up 10 times the amount? So all of this is very suspicious. And what's even more suspicious, the American Satellite Inspection Program, their GSAP, they had just launched number 5 and 6 into orbit. And 2 days later, China's trying to get rid of the evidence to pull that supposedly dead Badao satellite out of orbit. Now, I say supposedly dead. I think it was faked, its death. It was drifting around the geosynchronous belt. It probably had all sorts of sensors to see which way the satellites are pointed, and their signals intelligence, and see who's talking, and maybe laying space mines. Who knows? Now, why would I so readily believe that? Well, 35 years ago, I was on a program to do the very same thing, a spent stage in geosynchronous belt drifting around, appearing like it's dead, but it wasn't. So there's a lot of funny business going on in space. So how to win, how to lose a space war? Well, situation awareness, that's true of ground conflict or anything else. Positioning in the right spot, decisive political will. The space weapons don't have big red stars painted on the side of them. You don't know who's who and what's happening. And then even how do you define winning? One side could say, oh, I took out all your communication satellites. And the other side says, oh, no, we won. We took out all your imagery satellites. Well, which is best? I don't know. It's information warfare. The guy can't, you might think like Machiavelli. He'd say, well, like a Desert Storm, you had a dictatorship, and the troops in the trenches would freeze if they didn't get commands from their officers. So if you're going to have a space war, or let's say a war in general against a dictatorship, you might preposition space weapons that take out command and control, communication satellites. Where if you're talking about the Indo-European way of conflict, and I don't think I'm talking about Indonesia, but Indo-European, they just keep fighting regardless whether they get commands or not. So maybe you preposition anti-satellite imagery satellite kinds of things, to go against. So you have to kind of really figure that out. And then, you got to emphasize the consequences. What exactly did you do? Also, a lot of these cyberspace weapons are disposable. Use them once, the adversary knows what you did, and you can't use it again. So maybe you should hold back some of these weapons. And they talk a lot about shaping the battlefield. Well, you should be shaping the next conflict, because really what you're really doing, like in Ukraine, we're really teaching Russia how to fight us better next time around, And so you should be very judicious of what space weapons you might employ to make your adversary go a certain route after the conflict, both politically and militarily, and they'll design certain satellites or space weapons that are actually wrong if you taught them the wrong lesson. So you really, should really keep thinking these things out. Okay, what's been happening over Ukraine? This is a whole list of events that happen in space over Ukraine. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of it, except this thing. The United States attacked Russian GLONASS satellites. That's their GPS navigational satellites. All 24 of them were down for 13 hours. I'll show you a detailed analysis of that. Now, that was not a military strike, even though it looks like it. Ukraine was part of Russia, I don't know, 35 years ago. Russia built the roads in Ukraine. They know where everything was at. They didn't really necessarily need navigational satellites. It was a message. It's a way of, telling your adversary, stop what you're doing or else, threatening them or whatever you want to call it. And you have to kind of do it secretly so that the general populace doesn't get upset and, force you into a general conflict, which happened in World War I for Britain. So it's got to be kind of subtle. Well, obviously, this was too subtle for the Russian leadership because the leadership is not technical. And so 2 weeks later, the U.S. had to attack them again to send the message right. And then there was a bunch of all types of things. And, this thing I was saying, many ways to skin a cat. Well, on 30th April 2014, the head of the Russian Roscosmos said, they were launching American astronauts to the International Space Station at that time. I think they might still be. And he said, "Oh, well, you can use a trampoline now to get to the International Space Station. We're not going to launch you anymore." Well, that's kind of a diplomatic economic attack in one way. Um, one of my favorites here was a Russian Proton heavy lift launch vehicle was carrying a telecommunications satellite that would have covered the eastern Ukraine, launching the new satellite. And it never got to orbit. It crashed on a Chinese village just as Putin was conducting a diplomatic visit to Beijing to sell Russian space capabilities. Now, I can't prove that, but that sounds awfully circumstantial. And again, it's messaging, not necessarily militarily. It's a whole bunch of other things that are happening. And then Russia finally got pissed off and they attacked the American banking system. And again, this is all, it's obvious if you kind of understand these things, but this was in the open press. 5 different American banks in August 2014 had a cyber attack. They had, I think it was 60 million bank accounts and stock accounts downloaded. And, just the one bank, the Chase Manhattan Bank, spends $250 million a year on cybersecurity. But if you're going against a country, the country's always going to win. So the bank said, boy, it looked like it was coming from Russian servers. But suddenly, a few days later, you didn't hear anything more about it. It was sort of suppressed. But President Obama at the time suddenly stopped talking bad about the Russians in Ukraine. And a week later, everyone was at the Minsk agreements peace table signing, well, it really was a ceasefire. It was a fake agreement and all that. So I interpret that to mean that we were having a jolly good time attacking Russian satellites. The Russians got mad about it, took the space war down to the ground and attacked the American banking system, held on to those bank accounts and told Obama, if you don't stop what you're doing, we'll release these to hackers around the world. And he gave in. In other words, U.S. lost this first space war. But again, looking at the bigger picture. So let me just show you. This is a map of the English Channel. This red dot, he's a gentleman in England. He has a Russian GLONASS receiver. And these blue triangles are telling him he's in the middle of the English Channel. The receivers were, the satellites, probably the atomic clock was attacked cyber-wise or something like that. It was totally worthless. You're tens of kilometers away and so forth. So the Russians published the exact date and time. Every one of their GLONASS satellites started blinking out. And I sit here and I say, well, gee, I'm a rocket scientist. Let me see where they were on Earth every time they blinked out. Well, lo and behold, this is a map of the Earth. These are the orbital tracks of the Russian GLONASS satellites. And every time a Russian GLONASS satellite came over Alice Springs, Australia, in reality, Pine Gap, they would blink out. You just look at the orbital dynamics, and this is, Alice Springs here in Australia. Whenever you see a dotted white line, that means it's within view of these Russian GLONASS satellites. And every time a Russian GLONASS satellite came over this central Australia, it would blink out. And if there were several Russian GLONASS satellites within view of Australia, they would blink out in numerical order. GLONASS 1, 2, 3, and 4. They were being checked off a list. So it was obvious that, they were being attacked. And here's a picture of Pine Gap. That's, a well-known secret. National Security Agency listening site. It's been there since the 1960s. Published, I think it's 3 different movies on the site. Here's aliens attacking in the crashed domes. This is like a Google map, a look at it. And I have some of the challenge coins from there. And here, the U.S. proudly talks about its counter communication system. It's a cyber warfare against attacks. This is, U.S. Air Force, Space Force pictures. Here they are. I don't know if they were in Australia at that time. I didn't really want to check. So conclusions, all Russian satellites failing was very statistically unusual. The attacks from Pine Gap started exactly at 6:30 a.m. It's not like it was a natural phenomena. You could mathematically prove it happened. There's a whole bunch of other attacks that look like it was purposeful. So lessons learned. GLONASS attacks were too obvious. Somebody like elements and find out what's exactly coming on. But the trouble is they can't be too obscure because the adversary wouldn't receive the message. It's got to be very dramatic and very obvious, but not too dramatic that the whole world comes up in arms, and so forth. So, I mentioned you don't have to attack from Australia. These cyber weapons can be on ships around the world or on the rooftops of embassies around the world, and you can never figure out where it's coming from. But people don't think strategically, really, when it comes down to it. So, what's happening lately? Well, we had various satellites like Viasat being taken out in Ukraine, GPS jamming. Here's some of the jamming. Elon Musk, he using the Starlink, which I'm told has been very effective on the battlefield. Knowledge is everything, communications. The Russians complained that he had weaponized the Starlink system and he was killing Russian soldiers with it. So he shut it down during a Ukrainian attack. Now, I'm again interpreting this. A whole bunch of his Starlink satellites started falling out of the sky. Now, governments love to lie, and they have what I call the big flashing billboard reason for something. You say, oh, this is why this happened. And they, say, oh, it's solar flares that made these Starlink satellites fall out. But the real reason is in the sewage running under the billboard. And you look at that and it's like, well, there really wasn't much about solar flares. The year earlier, they were 10 times more intense and they didn't have all these falling out. Oh, by the way, over 200 satellites, broke or fell out of the sky over a 2-month period. So it seems to me uh, Russia probably attacked Elon Musk. Who knows? His wife, are some. Here's a Russian mobile laser blinder. The French, when I was in Lyon, France, proudly told me about their mobile laser blinder from a few years ago that they can turn up the power and actually damage the satellite. The Russians have been using that against some imagery satellites. Okay, let me scare you for my last piece here. What is the biggest threat from space? It's called fractional orbital bombardment system. It's something that the Russians developed in the 1960s, where instead of an ICBM coming north, it comes south over the South Pole and attacks. Well, if you have, let's say you had 2 tons of concrete and you pushed it out of a satellite, it comes down at Mach 26, deorbiting. I mean, that's several times hypersonic, and it's 3 times hotter than the surface of the sun. I am told now that China has these FOB systems for the express purpose of taking out American aircraft carriers. So if you had 2 tons of concrete coming down at Mach 26, it hits a American carrier, it'd be a 100-foot hole in the hull. It'd go all the way through, 3 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and make a big steam explosion with the ocean, split the carrier in half. It sinks in minutes. China tonight can sink every single American aircraft carrier around the world if they can. If they had this system up in space, who knows? It could be hidden inside dead satellites or whatever. And the U.S. is a land power, or it's a sea power. It's not a land power. Good luck marching a million soldiers across the North Atlantic if you don't have any ships, to defend Europe. And so this happened, and this is showing you a command center in Kiev, Ukraine, being taken out by a Russian hypersonic missile. It was 400 feet underground, and they just smeared it in one way or the other. But throughout history, no one's ever controlled all the seas. The British, yeah, a little bit, but not the whole world. If China did this, they can control all the seas, all the oil coming out of the Middle East, and essentially rule the world. And we would be put back 500 years ago, where only land power matters. And the only group of people who could matter who can deny the 1.4 billion Chinese domination of the world are the 1.4 billion Indians. Because only, again, if ships and even planes and all that don't matter, if you can take it out with these hypersonic weapons from space, and they're not too effective on a land army. Okay, they kill a couple hundred people. That's it. They're not mass. They're very direct. Okay, space wars and the moon. My whole career, the military never cared about the moon. The 1970s or something, NASA went to the Air Force, say, "Hey, do you want a base on the moon, a military base?" And they sort of scratched their head. It's like, no, I guess not. It's so far away. We don't really care, you know. But suddenly, you know, maybe in the last 10 years or something, everyone's really interested in the moon. I haven't quite figured that out. Here's like the Oracle space surveillance program. They have, you know, space imagery satellites on that dark side of the moon. One guy here, one group here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is developing cell phone service for the moon. You know, what the hell is that for? For two astronauts or something? So I can never figure out. My only thing I can think of is that maybe 10 minutes before Chinese taconauts land on the moon, they abrogate the 1967 outer space treaty, saying, "Oh, we're not going to be part of it anymore." Land on the moon and declare ownership of the whole moon. And maybe the U.S. and other countries realize this, and that's why we have this another moon race again to see who's the first there. Now, I look again back at history. I don't know, 400 or 500 years ago, the Pope had a papal bull saying the whole Western Hemisphere is split in half between Spain and Portugal. Well, good luck defending all that. And if you claim you own the moon, good luck defending the whole moon. So, who knows about that? But maybe it's just another space race for prestige, or maybe there's something more to it that I don't know about. Now, if you're talking about the moon, you really have to talk about the Lagrange points between the Earth and the moon, where you have equal gravitational potential between the Earth and the moon. And so satellites just sit there, and you just have to push them a little bit, and they come screaming back down to Earth or to geosynchronous orbit and attack satellites and all that. And that's been part of the space lunar lines of communication that you might have to defend. Maybe you have good space surveillance there. There's critical points. I already mentioned kinetic bombardment on it. Now, the moon is very funny. And if you guys really want to start thinking about space, start getting some software that does the lunar orbits. And there's all kinds of squirrely orbits because the moon is quite lumpy. It has different gravitational potentials around it. So you could probably find some really cool orbits that would dominate the moon in one form or another. Okay. Now, the other question is, why even fight on the moon? I mean, why are we not fighting on the International Space Station? We got Russians up there. We got, American astronauts and all that. Well, because it's a really tough environment to be shooting bullets at. And everyone dies if you do it, all that. And so it's maybe the moon, it just seems to me it's so hard to survive, very sharp, because it doesn't have wind and everywhere. There's a lady in charge of lunar dust at NASA. It's highly poisonous and all that. And so, I think he's sort of fostering cooperation versus conflict. I mean, who knows, 50 years from now, maybe. So I already mentioned the ISS is shared. And then I don't know how, abrogation outer space treaty, there's over, I think it's like 57 nations who never signed the outer space treaty. 20 of them never ratified it. Seems to me Elon Musk can use one of his mobile launch platforms, launch some astronauts to the moon, plant the American flag and say, "Oh, now I own it," or something like that, or own it. Let's say, no, plants a Brazilian flag. I don't know who signed this or something. He can launch it from there just offshore, plant the Brazilian flag, and Brazil leases back the moon for 99 years to Elon. I mean, isn't that what happened with Hong Kong and all that? Who knows? oh, here's a map of all the countries who did not sign. And I guess it looks like Brazil did, but is that Peru or something? I don't. Okay, so that's kind of it. I mentioned I've got the space warfare discussion group. Over 34,000 members now. You're welcome to join that. And here's some contact information. I've got actually 16 books out. One of them, the let's see, Falling Stars, Falling Empires, is about a young Indian boy who goes to the United States. He's a genius about orbital dynamics, and he goes and he is part of a team that attacking the Chinese space station that has these hypervelocity weapons that can take out the American aircraft carriers. So it's a novel that's kind of interesting, and I actually have some coloring books that come along with that. So I think that's it. That's it for me. Questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul. We have a question in our chat box from Kristen. His name
Okay.
is Wang, a student from Chengdu. The question is, in a space war, who has the legitimate authority to declare war? Is the nation infrastructure that actually in space, just in case?
Well, first of all, the Space Force, they won't believe me, but their main mission is to support the terrestrial war combat. There's no colonies in space, so there's nobody they're defending. There's no reason to attack the International Space Station, and actually, it's not possible to defend when you're talking about hypervelocities in space. You can't put 20 feet of concrete and expect, well, the thing would still go through it, any sort of weapon. So, who declares war? Well, see, that's kind of a funny thing. Did anyone declare war in Ukraine? Did anyone declare war in Iran? It's so funny too that we're supposedly at war in Ukraine against Russia, and Europe just signed a treaty. Germany just signed a treaty with Russia to establish nuclear power plants in Germany. Well, aren't you at war? Russia's going to send nuclear material to Germany, and all those EU nations in Europe are still buying Russian gas, even though we're supposed to be at war, guys, aren't we, or something? And so it's a funny thing. And getting back to, I think Machiavellian here, the beauty of space is that you can show intent, resolve, will on each other without starting a war on the ground. This is what was happening going against the Russian, GLONASS satellites and things like that. We took out the Iranian imagery satellite, which they bought commercially from China. So if someone goes up and blows up someone's satellite, which, actually has kind of happened, is that an act of war? And I think of it, it's sort of like cyber warfare. A few years ago, the Israelis attacked the Iranian centrifuges by a cyber attack, and it destroyed the centrifuge and all that. Is that still considered an act of war nowadays? People shoot down our airplanes and we don't go to war. I think war is a fuzzier thing than you might think. And so countries aren't going to say, oh, you shot down my satellite, I'm mad, I'm going to go to war. They're going to keep it quiet because it shows how weak they are. And maybe they'll go attack the other guy's satellite. But I really wonder, it's almost like a 1960s Star Trek movie thing or something of if you fight in space and you lose in space, don't even bother fighting on the ground. How would you conduct a war in the United States if you didn't have your GPS to make your missiles accurate, if you didn't have communication satellites to communicate to the carrier battle groups on, 5,000 miles away in the Western Pacific? You can almost get to the point of you run a war in space and that's it. You don't have to be blowing up Ukrainian cities. And so, there's a lot of people who say, oh, we don't want war in space. Maybe. There's a lot of people say, we don't want war in Antarctica. Oh, yeah, but there's no cities you're bombing there, and everything gets covered with snow afterwards. You got to sort of be practical. So who declares war? Now, I don't know what it means. Someone's commercial satellite gets attacked. The, the commercial people aren't going to declare war. They can, but they have no military to do something about it. It's sort of BS. Um, it's a thing I don't understand that the military is trying to engage commercial satellite operators in a future potential conflict. Well, do they pay back the commercial operators if their satellite gets blown up? And I think again, going back to War One, World War II, yeah, this commercial shipping bombs to England and getting sunk by German U-boats. How did we handle that? People dying and all that. That was happening for a few years before we even went to war. American ships and sailors dying. Um, it just all seems to me like very much funny business on that. I just Let me tell you another example. At least during the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have the drones were operated from Creech Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, the United States. And they use a satellite to bounce the signal on, and they're going around blowing people up and stuff like that. Well, okay, what's the legal rules here? Because they were at that time they were using Intelsat, International Telecommunications Society, whatever it's called. That 80 some countries sign up on it, and they're using one or two channels on there. Does that make that a legal target? Would you even want to target it and have 80 different countries around the world mad at you? Of course, the Russians just blew up a ship in the port of Odessa that had several Indian nationals on it who died. Is that enough to go to war? So anyway, getting back to this Intelsat communicating the drone controls, does that mean a ground center in France that's controlling Intelsat is a legal target? Hey, you just blew up my family. Can I go over there and blow up your ground center in France? I mean, you're part of the kill train. No, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems to me as a guy, you're talking space, you're talking World War. And I don't think there's any really hard threshold. It's a very much an emotional, analytic response to what am I going to do about this? It's like Switzerland declaring war on Russia. Oh, yeah, whatever. Who cares? They can't do anything about it. But it's also like you do something to me, I'm going to do something back, or otherwise I'm a wimp. And so you privately do that in space, I guess. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? Next question.
Yes, it does. The floor is open for all. You can ask your question by unmuting or putting it in the chat box. We have one question from Mohammed.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, Mohammed, you're
Yes.
audible.
Okay. In a space war fought across planets, we'll get to that what justice looks like when the law, the battlefield, and the victims are all in different worlds. Thank you.
Can you tell me that again, Mahima? I couldn't, it was broken up.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was same for me. Mohammed, could you repeat your question, please?
In a space war fought across planets, who gets to decide what justice looks like when the law, the battlefield, and the victims are all in different worlds?
Yeah, I think you said if there's war among planets or even in the moon, you killed my national on the moon. Are there even any laws, discussing that? I mean, that's something you guys should think about. Okay, let me tell you a story. It was 20, 25 years ago. I was at a space control conference, space warfare conference in Colorado Springs. This is before the Space Force. That's where they are now in the United States. And there was I guess, a crazy American general. And he got up on stage and he had this big American flag projected behind him. And he put on a World War II uniform. He looked like General Patton, like the movie. And he went up there and real tough, all this about space. And afterwards, I stopped him. I says, we've got Russian cosmonauts on the International Space Station. And what if we're doing the left hook and we're trying to sneak around behind the enemy? And he's sitting there in the space station with binoculars and calling back home to Russia and saying, hey, you guys are attacking. What would you do about that? And his first response was, oh, I'd shoot him. Well, yeah, I'm not sure you want to shoot a gun on an International Space Station and poke a hole and the oxygen goes out, all that sort of stuff and all. But it was a kind of a gung-ho thing, which I still think doesn't make much sense for what that's worth. So, you got me. Or war between the Earth and the Moon. You're at the Lagrange point and you shoot someone. Do laws about murder apply to you? I really don't know. The Outer Space Treaty and all that. I know you're not supposed to own celestial bodies. They get it wrong. They say you're not supposed to have weapons of mass destruction up there, but they really mean nuclear and chemical biologic, but it doesn't restrict good old bullets or something like that, or cyber weapons and things like that. But yeah, that's a hard one. And see, there's not only what is the law, but can you enforce it? And so, the UN goes around and it has all these rules and laws, and they can't really enforce it, in the International Criminal Court, and corruption's everywhere kind of thing. It just seems to me in all these bodies, one way, both ways, considering like Israel and Russia and a lot of this stuff, it's all who has the biggest gun, I suppose. I'm sorry to say. Did that answer it? I don't know if I heard it correctly anyway.
Mohammed, is your question answered?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, great.
We have one
No,
more question in the chat box.
okay.
Do you mind I speak this one first or take Rara's question? Okay, I'll start with the chat box. It's from Maria, talking about preventing the escalation of conflicts in outer space. How effective is international peacekeeping or monitoring mechanism for outer space?
I'm
Be
sorry, I couldn't
flexible.
understand the first few words.
Okay, I'll just repeat the question again. Talking about preventing the escalation of conflict in outer space, how effective is international peacekeeping or monitoring mechanism and the discussion or conference for outer space be feasible to prevent the escalation of the conflict over lunar infrastructure? At the end of the day, those are discussions over other discussions prior.
Okay, I'm sorry to tell all you guys, but I worked on programs so special we constantly ignored international treaties. So again, getting back to you can get away with it, you do. Now, somebody, who's doing something about China and the South China Seas and taking over territory that's disputed? The UN do anything about it? Somebody going in with, guns and blowing things up? A lot of these things you have to have an enforcement mechanism. Now, I always thought possibly the United Nations should have a space surveillance network around the world. There's 2 or 3 companies that have their own. They could buy a network and they could look to see who's, coming close to whom, try to figure out, is there hidden weapons inside this spacecraft that's supposedly a commercial or a civil spacecraft? They could have algorithms saying, well, XYZ country claimed that this was a weather satellite and it looks like a weather satellite. It's in the weather satellite orbit and it has about the same size as the weather satellite. Blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, it's 10 times the size and it's in a different orbit. Okay, well, your radars and your sensors could tell you that. And also, I think any intelligent country would detect before they're going to attack, let's say the United States or someplace on the ground, they would pre-position their space weapons in space to attack the United States' space assets. And it takes days and weeks to kind of maneuver them into certain choke points, jumping off points. So if the United Nations, or let's say even the US or some other country had these sensors that can detect that, and they can say, this really looks like they're setting up to do a major attack against hundreds of satellites or whatever, which implies they're about to attack on the ground. Can you, first of all, go up there and frustrate that attack, disable some of the satellites, or just go and look at them and say, we know what you're doing? Can you go to the UN and say, hey, it looks like they want to attack on the ground now. We have this evidence. And can you discourage them from that? Can the United Nations have the sensors to try to figure that out? I even thought, I'm Catholic, maybe all these, the Pope ought to have a space surveillance network. There's people, amateur astronomers, they pool their money and they buy these remote antennas that you can control from the internet, and they're $20,000 or $30,000, and put it on a mountaintop somewhere. Well, any country on Earth can spend a few $1,000,000, put these on the top of embassies around the world that has good weather and all that, and figure out what's happening in space. And I think just diplomatically, it'd be really nice to know that the US and China are at war in space and no one else knows. And for you to know, I mean, that's probably worth a few $1,000,000, I would think, for India or something like that, just to sort of know what's coming on and what's next, or maybe to figure out that China is building up to attack somehow. Knowledge is everything, whether it's ancient Greek hoplite warfare or futuristic. And the trouble is, it's space. Man, that's so far away. And it's hard to actually look at a satellite. I've always worried, let's say you're at US is at war in China, and the Western Pacific. And suddenly we wake up one morning and some of our satellites stop working. Okay, well, we couldn't see it coming. It came from some secret place, we think. Though maybe it was solar flares that zapped the electronics. Maybe a micrometeorite hit it. Maybe a satellite got close, which they do all the time, just natural orbital perturbations, and accidentally hit it or whatever. Or oh no, this is human caused and intentional. Okay, we figured that much out. Well, what's the intent? As I says, communication, imagery, command and control. What exactly are they doing? Are they doing something like the Arabs used to do in the Middle East against Israel? They get all those armies together and run up to the border, make Israel, everyone quit their job and put on their uniforms and go up and all, and they sit there and do nothing. So, and then they ruin the Israeli economy. Same with satellites. Oh, you rush up to the satellite and sit there and do nothing. Oh, the guy just used up all his fuel maneuvering out of the way, or look at, he pulled out this weapon, didn't fire it, but now we know he has it. There's all these funny, now I sort of forgot where I was going, but what was the question again?
Do you want me to repeat the question? It's about talking about the preventing the escalation of the conflict in outer space. How effective is international peacekeeping or monitoring mechanism in discussion or the conference for outer space be possible?
Maybe again, the UN could have its own inspection satellites. See, the trouble is how do you look inside a satellite? Now, some company claiming they were going to X-ray satellites using the natural cosmic rays or something like that. But here's this silly satellite sitting around. How do you know there isn't a weapon inside? And then it takes a lot of fuel. I mean, it's, space is so vast. Think of somebody throws a soccer ball somewhere on Earth and tells you go find it. Oh, not only on Earth, it's like millions of miles between the Earth and the moon, and the volume is so amazingly big. And oh, by the way, he's painted black. And he's trying really hard to hide it. So you're really not sure, really don't know. You're talking about really expensive programs. And then, oh, okay, well, they just spent a few $1 billion at the UN and they got all these sensor networks. Maybe they have some inspector satellites. Maybe they have radiation detectors to see if there's nukes on board and stuff like that. Okay, great. They report it to the National Security Council or whatever it is, UN Council. And the US nixes it. Okay, we can't let you get it out, because the UN is really ineffective if you've got veto power by the main countries on Earth. And then again, you get to the point of, oh, geez, those damn whatevers just put up this space weapon. Well, what are you going to do about it? You're just going to bitch and moan and complain about it. Is there, you going to do a boycott on Earth or something? Or you going to go up there and attack it? Are you going to grab it and pull it out of orbit, maybe? Under what law allows you to do that? I don't know. It sort of sounds cool, peacekeeping. Um, I'm not sure how that really works in space. I mean, has peacekeeping really worked on the ground? I guess in some ways. When's the last time we had peace on Earth, or the UN came in and made peace? Probably they haven't
That's true.
dared to do that in Ukraine. No one, Russia or the U.S. Or even Britain or something would nix it. And then what does that mean? They all get shot up themselves because those guys are really serious there in Ukraine. The Ukraine thing is it's actually a NATO race war. NATO started it because it's um, uh, uh, what do you call it? I'm Polish. I know about that. Just think about it. If Italy attacked France, would the U.S. go in there and give $300 billion worth of military gear to kill as many Italians as possible? Would you, suddenly, oh, we blew up the Colosseum, and they would say, why'd you do that? Oh, because there's anti-aircraft batteries there. Oh my gosh, you just blew up Vatican City and killed the Pope and 100 cardinals. I mean, that's sort of what's happening in Ukraine. We don't really care. Where if it was Italians, we would say, oh, we're using $300 billion of gear to kill Italians. And my neighbor's Italian. He seems all right. But Slavic people, well, the word slave comes from Slavic. For 1,000 years, they were mined as slaves. And so we don't mind, they started that whole thing, NATO. They wanted Russia to go in. And we thought we were going to get them. Countries work. And what did the UN do about that?
That's true. We are
Nothing.
waiting for the UN sunset for a lot of wars.
Yeah. And even I talked about the International Criminal Court, and I'm no friends of Russia and all that, but they put a warrant out for Putin's arrest because of missing children. Well, you're in a war zone and you pull the children out, put them safely in Russia. And oh, by the way, all those children they said were missing ended up in Germany. So why did they put a warrant out for Putin's arrest? Why not the warrant out for the premier in Germany? It's all BS. It's all made up stuff to make us feel good. Really is my interpretation of all this. You got to be able to understand that 80 to 90% of what you know is propaganda in one way or the other. Anyway, I mean, they're Nazis in Ukraine. I know. I studied World War II. They have Nazi symbols on their helmets and on their tanks and all that. The head of what do you call it? The chief of defense. He has a Nazi tattoo on his hand, and he has a picture on the left hand of his desk of I forget the guy's name, who killed 200,000 Poles in World War II. And he said the Poles weren't worth the price of bullets, so they used hatchets. The neo-Nazis, they're all Nazis. It's well known. But, they public opinion, you can manipulate it very easily. And so I'm getting on my soapbox here. Any other questions?
Yeah, we do have one question from the audience. Farah, you can go ahead.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Paul, Ms. Mahima. Thank you for the opportunity. I will say thank you for Mr. Paul for the comprehensive presentation. That's so really great. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rahmi Darwanita, a background from public health, but this is just I want to know more about that. Considering that many young people in developing countries like Indonesia are not directly involved in the space sector. So I have a basic question for Mr. Paul. What do you think is the most important reason for us to understand issues such as space sectors and lunar exploration? And how can we contribute actively to this field in the future? Maybe I think that's question. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think anyone can participate. There's various groups. There's actually they do a lot of military simulations online that you can participate in, but thinking not military here on that. First of all, I would think Indonesia needs a lot of communication satellites, and I think they do have some already. But big country, a lot of islands and stuff like that. And I guess the most important thing for human beings is knowledge, to really understand, what's happening around their country and people like them around the world. So that's probably pretty good. There's a lot of free software online that you can download and start looking at orbits. I mean, you could do something like, what's the best orbit for Indonesia to cover this? I always thought, talking about the United States now, but maybe I'm really a space cadet. I really love space. I really want to get in. How can I get in? And I tell people here, well, go to a space conference, find out there must be, Indonesian space groups, and be a young, smiling kid, dressed nice and willing to do anything, and tell the people in charge of the conference, oh, I love space so much. I'll work for free. I'll be at the door and take tickets, and I'll get your coffee and all this, and you get in on it. And then you walk around to all the booths and you get all their free literature, and you go back to your room or something, look at all and say, these 2-3 companies I think are really good. It looks really interesting. And you go to their booths and you say, oh man, I really like what you guys are doing. And you know how it is when you're young and, oh, please, and all this. Nobody can say no. And, they all want to help a young kid. And especially, again, you look decent and you act decent. You say, can I help you run your booth? And, again, I'll get you coffee. Or when you go to the bathroom, I'll help run the booth and I'll, find out. And, don't pay me. That's all right. And then you sort of get in with them. They say, hey, this guy's really smart and he's really motivated, we have a summer job opportunity. Why don't you come in and do that? And, I did that 54 years ago, where I was in college and I went to a lecture by someone from General Electric, I think, or something like that. And I stopped the guy afterwards in the hall. I says, I'm a graduate student. I love to work some project. Can I work a project at your General Electric office, agree, and I'll work for free. I'm going to be doing this work anyway, and no one can stop that offer. And of course, they're going to pay you anyway. They paid me, because you're just a kid. It's just a few dollars here. We're not giving you health. Where do I have to go where I'm living? There's probably all sorts of space clubs, but you wanted to get to a professional one. I mean, there's some Indonesian space agency. They probably have exhibits. Go to the space agency and involve the space museum or something. It just seems to me, if you're smiling and really willing, and the people can't help but say yes. And if they do say no, you don't want to work with them anyway. Kind of thing. So it's a certain degree of polite aggression, I would think. And that's almost true worldwide. I mean, isn't there a Space Advisory Council, which I don't really know, some sort of UN thing that I seem to see people all the time claiming they're part of it. And so I really small, no one thought about of, well, if you murder your wife on the moon, what's the law applicable to it? Or something crazy like that. And write up a paper, and maybe you can get it published, or you present it at one of their meetings or something like that. It just use your imagination. But knowledge is everything. Just keep pulling in knowledge from around the world. And NASA has intern programs and all. Maybe you can somehow go to your somehow the Indonesian diplomatic office and say, can you contact the embassy in the United States and see, and they probably, the United States, oh, someone from Indonesia, that's different, This is why I'm briefing here. I said, oh, Indonesia, that sounds cool. And maybe you can somehow be in the right place at the right time. I remember my son, I took him to the college, and before he started college, to talk to somebody about it. And we saw someone walking out. We started talking to him, and it's like, oh, we got this summer program here. You want him to join? Yeah, sure. Be right place at the right time, getting out there. And then if you've got that sort of personality, you're going to succeed one way or the other. And it's aggression, I guess. Or you're smiling a lot. I don't know. But sooner or later, you got to be competent too, on these things. So I don't know if that inspires.
I hope, Farah, your question was answered.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Farah. I agree with the knowledge. It's so important for us. Thank you.
Yeah, and motivation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Farah, and everyone, for your questions. I have one more important message from the co-chair of Moon Village Association. So just stay tuned. I'm going to share my screen and let me know if the voice is not clear.
Okay, I think I have to stop my screen, don't I?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Paul.
Somehow, let me see. And just click to exit. Okay. I think it might be, okay, go for it. The share, lower right.
Yeah, I have started sharing my screen.
Okay.
I hope the voice was clear.
I can't hear anything.
Okay, I'm gonna play it now. So
No, I can't hear anything. Can you guys hear it?
okay, let me just check it again.
I mean, I can hear you.
Okay, just let me show the
Was he from the UAE or what?
yes.
Oh. I always thought the UAE was trying to be like the Switzerland of the Middle East. And I've always proposed that we should have a space warfare think tank where you bring in, retired generals and State Department people and things like that. And discuss all these issues, the legal issues, how do you fight in war? How do you define winning and stuff like that? And, a good place for that might be in the UAE, and you should be able to get an astronaut on the moon sooner or later too.
Yeah, I guess it's Clara, if I'm not wrong.
Greetings.
Okay, I'll share this sound again. Just let me know if it's not audible. Okay, I'll share it
Yes.
from the start. Thank you so much for confirming, Paul.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the fifth International. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the fifth International Moon Day celebrations. I'm Nasr Sahaf, co-chair of the IMD. The International Moon Day was declared by the United Nations General Assembly in December 2021 as a direct response to humanity's strong interest in returning to the moon after more than a half century since man's first landing. In this spirit, IMD has led the world in celebrating this aspiration by providing a world-class platform whereby organizations, institutions, both public and private, and people from around the world may upload and share their activities and celebrations in their own cultural heritage and various themes. Our inaugural main event took place in Huntsville, Alabama, home of the Saturn V rocket in 2022. At the Drake State Technical and Community College. We had a theme at that time. It was with the theme beginning the new lunar journey for humanity. Followed in 2024 at the Harbin Institute of Technology in Harbin, China, with the theme of illuminating the shadows. Last year, in 2025, we celebrated the main event at the University of Dubai in the UAE with more than 60 global events worldwide. The theme then was One Moon, One Vision, One Future. The International Moon Day continues in its tradition of inclusivity to all peoples of the world this year and holds its main event at Bogota, Colombia, at the Maloca Interactive Museum with the theme To the Moon Together. Wherever you may be, I invite you to join us in making this a landmark celebration of the International Moon Day and wish you the best in representing your region of the world and sharing your activities and heritage with everyone by uploading your participation on our website from now till October 31st, 2026.
The message
www.internationalmonday.org.
was still here.
God bless.
Everyone, I'm going to share the feedback form in the chat box as well. Please fill it to let us know how to improve the sessions in future. If there are no further questions, I will start with the closing remark. Okay. As I've seen no raised hand, I will start. Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul, for the incredible insight discussion into the realities of the space control, military doctrine, and the strategies complexity of orbital operations. Your perspective is invaluable as we navigate the legal and geopolitical frontiers of lunar exploration. I also want to extend a special thank you to the president and the founder of Farah Law School, Farah Yasmin, for organizing this crucial dialogue and continuously working to strengthen the international law community and space enthusiasts. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of our fourth virtual lecture series on International Moons Day. Bridging the gap between establishing spacefaring powers and emerging nations starts with a conversation exactly like this one. Before you log off, please make sure you fill out the feedback form, and thank you everyone for joining once again.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you, Ms. Mahima.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the
Same
opportunity.
here.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, it was really insightful.
How can we take a picture? Like a
Yes,
screenshot?
yeah, I'll take
Sure.
the screenshot, everyone, just on your cameras if possible. Okay, let's say cheese or whatever is preferable for you. Smile, please. Okay, that's it. I'm done.
Okay, I'll send you a copy of the briefing.
Yes.
Okay.
Next session. Okay, we'll end the session over here, Farah. You can stop the recording as well. Thank you everyone for joining the call. See you in the next call. Bye everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you very much. You did it well, Mahima. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farah, for inviting me.
No, it's thank you.
Okay. Bye bye everyone. I'm gonna end the call here. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank